Do you trust the mainstream media? And this is something that is near and dear to most of our freedom-loving hearts. I wish that we had a journalist apparatus that we would implicitly trust to give us accurate news. Obviously, in my opinion, that isn't the case. However, I always want to seek an alternative opinion to see if somebody can sway me. So let's go ahead and watch this monk debate together. Now, I'm going to fast forward past the first 10 minutes, just so you know. The issue is, do you trust the mainstream media or trust the mainstream media? And it's basically 50-50. So here we go.
Be it resolved, don't trust mainstream media. My name is Matt Taibbi. I've been a reporter for 30 years, and I argue for the resolution. You should not trust mainstream media. I grew up in the press. My father was a reporter. My stepmother was a reporter. My godparents were reporters.
Opening remarks.
Basically every
Opening
adult
argument.
I knew growing up was a reporter. So I actually love the news business, but I mourn for it. It's destroyed itself by getting away from its basic function, which is just to tell us what's happening. My father had a saying, "The story's the boss." In the American context, this means that if the facts tell you the Republicans were the villains in a political disaster, then you write it that way. If the facts point more at the Democrats, you write that. If they're both culpable, as was often the case for me when I investigated Wall Street for almost 10 years after the 2008 crash, you write the story that way. We're not supposed to thumb the scale. Our job is just to call things as we see them and leave the rest up to you. But we don't do that now.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, everything that he's saying. The mainstream media today is not just calling balls and strikes. They're not just presenting the case as it appears. No. They are moving the ball into the strike zone. At least that's my preconceived notion as we go through this debate.
The story is no longer the boss. Instead, we sell narrative in a dysfunctional new business model. Once the commercial strategy of the news business was to go for the whole audience. A TV news broadcast was aired at dinner time, and it was designed to be watched by the entire family. Everyone from your crazy right-wing uncle to the sulking lefty teenager in the corner. This system had flaws, but making an effort to talk to everybody had benefits. For one thing, it inspired trust. Gallup polls twice showed Walter Cronkite to be the most trusted person in all of America. That would never happen with a newsreader today. With the arrival of the internet, some outlets found that instead of going after the whole audience, it made more financial sense to pick one demographic and try to dominate it. How do you do that? That's easy. You just pick an audience and feed it news you know they'll like. Instead of starting with a story and following the facts, you start with what pleases your audience and work backward to the story. This process started with Fox, but really now everybody does it. From CNN to OAN to the Washington Post, nearly all media organizations are in the same demographic hunting business. According to a Pew Center survey from a few years ago, 93% of Fox's audience votes Republican. In an exactly mirroring phenomenon, 95% of the MSNBC audience votes Democratic.
I'm generally surprised that MSNBC, 5% of its audience votes Republican. I'm shocked. I think that those are the people like me that are leaning in and searching for something to make fun of. That's the only thing I can come up with. Continuing.
The New York Times readers are 91% Democrats. Left or right, most commercial audiences in America, anyway, are politically homogenous. This bifurcated system is fundamentally untrustworthy. When you decide in advance to forego half of your potential audience to cater to the other half, you're choosing in advance which facts to emphasize and which to downplay, based on considerations other than truth or newsworthiness. This is not journalism. This is political entertainment, and it's therefore fundamentally unreliable.
I would go ahead and just call it political propaganda, because that's what it is at this point.
With editors now more concerned with retaining audience than getting things right, lots of guardrails have been thrown out. Silent edits have become common. Serious accusations are made without calling people for comment. Reporters get too cozy with politicians and report things either without attribution or sourced to unnamed people familiar with the matter. Like scientists, journalists should be able to reproduce each other's work in the lab. With too many anonymous sources, this is impossible. We just get a lot of stuff wrong now. In the Trump years, an extraordinary number of quote-unquote bombshells went sideways. From the P-tape to the Alpha server story to speculation that Trump was a Russian spy recruited before disco started to...
And that is the narrative that they ran with for over 3 years. How could you get that wrong? And the New York Times, I believe, has admitted there is some leaked audio from the editor-in-chief or somebody very high up in the newspaper that, whoops, guess we got that one wrong. But the leftists won't admit that.
False reports of Russians hacking a Vermont utility. We've accumulated piles of these wrong stories. Now, I'm no fan of Donald Trump. I wrote a book about the guy called Insane Clown President. But these stories offend me. A good journalist should always be ashamed of error, and it bothers me to see so many of my colleagues not ashamed. News media shouldn't have a side. It should focus on getting things right, which, believe me, is a hard enough job. Until we get back to the basics, we don't deserve to be trusted, and we won't be. Thank you very much.
I'm actually a big fan of Matt Taibbi. He's on the left. He's a liberal reporter. And what I found very funny is that recently the Washington Compost, that's my bias, when presenting the story of the Twitter files, said that it was being reported on by conservative reporters, Matt Taibbi and Barry Weiss. There's no truth to that. What they're doing is merely telling their readers that they can ignore it because they've put a label on them as conservative. But I'm generally a big fan of Matt because he tries to get it right. And I will learn from him. And that is what a journalist is supposed to be. Somebody who's trying to get the facts right, who's trying to dig through the muck and present the facts as they are, which is, again, the opposite of what the media is today. But we will proceed here.
We appreciate that opening statement. Now we're going to hear from the con side. Michelle, you're up.
Okay, I'm pretty sure this is Michelle Goldberg from the New York Times. Michelle Goldberg from the New York Times. I am not a fan of her. I've heard her in a debate against Jordan Peterson.
Which I know can happen with American journalists. But I do want to start by talking about an election that we just had in America. And some of the things that the media got wrong in the run-up to that election. There was
in the run-up to that election,
why the midterms are going to be great for Donald Trump. Politico commissioned a poll. The poll came back showing that more people intended to vote for Democrats than Republicans. Politico then wrote a story about how Democrats were about to get trounced and dismissed its own poll as an outlier. I bought into the red wave narrative because it was what the pollsters were saying. It seemed to be what the people who I thought knew what they were doing.
And exactly what should have happened, given the fact that this administration has racialized everything. There's a new war, there's massive amounts of inflation, and that the president is completely out to lunch with dementia. But again, my view of the current state of affairs in America.
We're saying, so I'm not standing up here and arguing that the media never gets anything wrong and that the media is full of human beings who are subject to all of the frailties that human beings are subject to, right? The media can be subject to groupthink, it can be subject to fads, absolutely. What I want to argue is that the media doesn't get things wrong because of ideological capture. It certainly didn't help the Democrats when the New York Times was reporting again and again that Republicans were going to sweep.
OMG. We don't get anything wrong because of ideological capture. So explain the Covington kids with the Indian. Explain how you got Jussie Smollett wrong. Explain how for 3 years you went on and on about the Donald Trump being a Russian asset. Explain all these things and how you can avoid saying that it was ideological capture, along with the Hunter Biden laptop, which I'm willing to bet will be brought up at some point during this debate. How did you guys get that wrong, if not for ideological capture? How did you not contact the people on the email chains and ask, gee, is this true? Why have we not seen Tony Bobolinsky, if not for ideological capture?
And in fact, it affected people's donation decisions. It affected their volunteering decisions. A lot of people would have allocated a lot of resources differently if they had any idea that some of these races would be as close as they were. The media tends to overcorrect. It tends to respond to the mistakes that it made. And this can result in new mistakes, but it also means that it is a mechanism that is inherently self-correcting. I think that when you say, can we trust the mainstream media? Obviously, you should seek out lots of sources, right? People should read Matt's blog, they should read conservative media, they should read liberal media. But think about the big stories of the last 5 years or so. From the Trump presidency to COVID to the war.
Which you got wrong.
If you had just followed the CBC, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the BBC, they all got some things wrong. I think a lot of the media
they got
didn't pay enough attention,
wrong.
For example, to the problems of quote unquote, I say this as someone with young children, remote learning. I think we got a lot of things.
Do you think that possibly could have been because of ideological capture? Because we can't trust them, because they know that if parents are having a tough time, that they're going to blame whoever is in power and vote them out, which in that case was Donald Trump. Do you not think that could have been part of it? And then they want to cover for more and more Democrats who in the governor mansions who went out of their way to help the teachers unions? Okay, sorry.
During COVID. But in terms of the big stories, if you paid attention to the mainstream media, you were likely to be much safer and much closer to the truth than if you followed the kind of contrarians, if you followed the people who were saying, don't trust the mainstream media, trust these alternative sources of information.
Yeah, like Jay Bhattacharya, which was the Stanford professor who one of the authors of the Great Barrington Declaration, who said maybe we shouldn't do these lockdowns. Maybe we should mind the fact that we're destroying the economy and have some compassion for workers who are losing their jobs, their livelihoods, their reason for being. But no, we catered to the laptop class, which was the media who were advocating the lockdowns, who were scaring the shit out of people because it got them more readership. Gee, I wonder whether or not that was for immediate profits in addition to ideological capture.
If you were saying that, for example, it was a common refrain, I think one that Matt made again and again throughout the Trump presidency, that people who were extremely alarmed about the prospects of authoritarianism, that people who believed that Donald Trump would try to overturn our constitutional order were hysterical. I think that the point of view of the hysterics is actually held up kind of well in light of January 6th.
Oh, so you want to go ahead and defend the fact that you were absolutely hysterical the entire Trump administration, and that gave you the license to lie to the American public about Donald Trump stating that World War II veterans were suckers, about the fact that Donald Trump was against veterans, which was a lie that was told over and over, all the lies that were told, and you're defending it. It's ridiculous. And Donald Trump, he said, go in peace. And you want to just continue to play this up. You don't ask questions about why Nancy Pelosi refused extra troops and police and why all of the missing videotape, the thousands of hours of missing videotape around the Capitol, why they're holding that up. But you just want to point to that one moment in time that justifies every single lie that the media made that doesn't allow us to trust them. I find this woman to be exceedingly boring and uninteresting and far less intelligent than most people on this planet.
COVID, we got things, the journalists were following experts who were facing a once-in-a-century pandemic, and official guidance kept changing. So you heard different things about masks. You heard different things about whether or not the vaccines really prevented transmission. You heard different things about whether the J&J.
No, actually, a journalist that came out and said that perhaps, just perhaps, we should not, we should take a look at these vaccines. Maybe the virus might morph. We were called conspiracy theorists. And I got suspended from YouTube as somebody who's investigating, who's offering an opinion, who's trying to get down to the brass tacks. I was right, and all of us were kicked off. And you called Tom Cotton, not the New York Times, the Washington Post, a conspiracy theorist who's advocating for a debunked theory that the virus might have escaped from the Wuhan laboratory. And you want us to trust you guys. Okay, I'm obviously coming in with a bias. I hope that maybe that this side gets a little bit better, but I, again, dislike this woman.
Vaccine was as good as the mRNA vaccines. However, if you followed the mainstream media, you knew that COVID pretty early, you knew that COVID was airborne. You knew that it was more serious than the flu. And you knew that the vaccines were likely to protect you.
Did they?
The COVID contrarians, the contrarian media, the one who were saying not to trust kind of mainstream sources of opinion, were saying this is just another flu. Deaths are going to be 6,000. The media doesn't want to tell you, I mean, Matt wrote this several times, the media doesn't want to tell you about ivermectin.
They intentionally lied about ivermectin. You had on the Joe Rogan show, you had Sanjay Gupta come on and admit that CNN shouldn't have covered it like they did. And he went right back because these shills for Pfizer own the media and they're paying their advertisements. And you don't think that they're going to acquiesce to what the Pfizer board of directors tells them is news?
Brought to you by Pfizer. Brought to you by Pfizer.
Brought to you by Pfizer.
And he went right back on CNN and cucked to Don Lemon and said, yes, it was horse paste, which is how they were trying to frame it. There was no discussion about ivermectin. Anything that was brought up was suppressed and is still, frankly, being so.
There was in the run-up to the invasion of Ukraine, again, I think Matt said that, the media is overhyping this, that people are kind of taking stenography from the Biden administration, that Russia actually is probably not going to invade. And then when it did invade, what you've heard from a lot of kind of people who reflexively distrust the media is that the media is being too triumphalist. They won't admit that Russia's doing much better than they say. They pretending that, that the Ukrainians have more of a chance than they did. And again, I would just say that I think that the mainstream media has gotten the big things right. And so no. Mainstream journalism, there's a lot you can say against it. I would, just to paraphrase Churchill, it is the worst system in the world except for all the others. Thank you.
Oh my God. It is the worst system in the world because it's been totally corrupted by money, like Pfizer, who get the media to report exactly as they want.
Brought to you by Pfizer.
They get them to suppress stories like ivermectin, the Hunter Biden laptop story. That woman is uninteresting, uninspiring, and I might just clip her out entirely in order to shorten this video for the future. We'll see. Mm-hmm. I have an avid dislike for her, in case you couldn't tell.
Thank you. Douglas, the stage is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Rudyard.
I'm a big fan of Douglas Murray, by the way.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. As Rudyard said, I've come a rather long way from the front lines of the Ukraine conflict because I like to see these things with my own eyes for myself and to come to my own conclusions. I came out through Moldova the other day, through London, then got to Toronto, and a friend of mine said, "Why are you going to Toronto?" I said, "An invitation to Toronto in late November? Who on earth says no to that?"
He's got a sense of humor.
Only a madman would say no to that. You'll see shortly why I'm so keen to speak about this issue here in Canada. Let me put it this way, though, to begin with. I would say in recent years, any sentient observer of the media will have had their moment of realization, a moment where they saw through something that the mainstream media was doing. It may have happened because the mainstream media said something about you or someone you know. It may be, as in my case, for instance, that an entire country got maligned by the mainstream media. It's very interesting, this result. It was a 48-52. That's exactly the result that the British people had in the Brexit vote. You know what? When we voted to leave the European Union, we did so against all of the imprecations of the New York Times, Michelle's employer. We just didn't listen to them. And the New York Times never forgave us. Ever since 2016, there has not been one story in the New York Times that's positive about Britain. We have had, and I'll run through some of them, we had a culinary review that said that the British people still survive on mutton and oatmeal.
English food is bad.
We had an anti-Brexit piece
sorry,
from the North of
Douglas.
England, from Lancashire, a piece of reporting, where the author ended up having to admit that every single one of his facts was wrong, but his perception was correct. We had, recently the New York Times drafted in somebody from Russia Today, Vladimir Putin's propaganda channel, as an employee of the New York Times, to attack Brexit Britain. And when Her Majesty the Queen died, not 10 days of mourning was observed at the New York Times, 3 hours before they started attacking the Queen. And they did so day after day after day, because they hate Brexit Britain. That is just an agenda, ladies and gentlemen. That's not anything else.
Of course.
It's an agenda, one they've decided to take. Now, I said that I want to be here in Canada to talk about this because I think that this country has just been through something absolutely extraordinary. You really know that the world is in trouble when Canada becomes very interesting. I remember
My wife
your
is from
election,
Canada.
as Norm
They are
Macdonald
a
said,
boring-ass
should we put
country.
up that bridge or not? Now Canada has become really interesting. It became interesting in January and February of this year. Why? Because you had protesters in Ottawa. Really interesting. When people come out in large numbers. And you know what the job of reporters is? The job of reporters is to go out and say, why are you on the streets? What brought you here? Why are you here with your kids? Why have you got a bouncy castle in the middle of Ottawa? That's a bit strange. Ask them questions. Just find out the story. But you know what? The government didn't want that in Canada. Your Prime Minister decided in advance that these people were, what did he do? All the modern excommunications. They were Nazis, they were white supremacists, they were anti-Semites, they were probably homophobes, they were misogynists, they were probably transphobes, etc., etc., etc. He did all the things you do in the modern political age if you want to just defenestrate somebody who's awkward to you. And then he brings in the Emergency Powers Act. Now, at such a time, what would the mainstream media do? It would question it. It would question it.
You would think.
The Canadian mainstream media did not.
No, they
The
did
Canadian
not.
mainstream media acted as an amen chorus of the Canadian government. I will give you a couple of examples, but...
And that's because they are paid directly by the Canadian government.
I could go on for hours with examples of this. You had a CBC host describing the Freedom Convoy as a, quote, feral mob. You had a Toronto Star columnist saying, quote, sorry for the language, it's a homegrown hate farm that was then jet-fueled by an American right-funded rat-fucking operation. Jesus, they can't even write at these papers anymore. CBC said that 2 Indigenous women were so scared to go outside in Ottawa because of racist violence didn't bother to mention that Indigenous drummers had led the truckers in an O Canada rendition. The National Observer said that the many black and Indigenous Freedom Convoy supporters were in fact duped by the truckers. The Globe and Mail reporter said, my 13-year-old son told me to tell protesters I'm not a Jew out of fear of anti-Semitic violence without mentioning that one of the leaders of the convoy was himself Jewish. Now, why is this so rancid? Utterly, utterly rancid and corrupt. Because in this country, your media, your mainstream media, is funded by the government.
Oh, exactly what I was just saying.
A totally corrupted system. In 2018, election year, coincidence, the Canadian media has given $595 million over 5 years. The Toronto Star estimated it was going to...
So again, like Pfizer, don't you think that they are going to report as their masters, as their funders want them to? Do you not think that they have some power over the direction of the reporting? I say, si, senor.
Be getting $3 million from the government in the first half of the year. It went on and on. So you see, the mainstream, the government in Canada can tell people they can tell the banks to shut down people's bank accounts. Oh yeah. Your government can do that, and if you're happy with that, just think about what would happen if the shoe was on the other foot. The government can do that, but in Canada, they can also tell the media what to do, and the media does the bidding of the Canadian government. That isn't a free society's media. I've seen unfree countries all my life. But this, in a developed liberal democracy like Canada, is a disgrace. We're not saying don't read the mainstream media. We're just saying don't trust them.
Ding, 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 ding. What a great opening statement by Douglas Murray. I find him to be a very impressive, intelligent individual. Maybe it's the British accent that he has mastered and he sounds so good. It's the voice. He has a certain gravitas to him. And you just compare that to Michelle Goldberg and even Matt Taibbi. I mean, if you just hone in on who you want to listen to based on his mannerisms, his voice, it is definitely Douglas Murray.
Okay, Malcolm, you're going to get the final opening statement today, so take us away.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back home. I thought I'd just tell two very simple stories. One of them will not be about the truckers, who I think have been well defended by my colleague, Mr. Murray.
Why do you have to say that? You don't have to tell us what you're not going to discuss.
My journalism career at the Washington Post, which that is the definition of the mainstream media, and this was from the mid-'80s to the mid-'90s, in the era of the mainstream media's greatest influence. And the two things, it was there that I learned my trade as a journalist, and there were two things that were drilled into me at my time there. One was the importance of fairness. If you quoted someone denouncing someone else, you had to call up the person who was denounced and get a response. If X said something about Y, you had to call Y and find out how they felt about what X said. You had to make a good faith effort to talk to all sides of an issue. And if you did not do that, your story did not appear in the paper, right? Second thing that was very important was accuracy. I remember once I did a story about a mall in Buffalo.
So do you want us to trust the mainstream media of the 1980s? Is that what you're advocating for, based on past precedent, or how they are behaving right now?
And it was an upscale mall, and they had the bus stop across a busy highway from the mall. They didn't want the sort of person who came on a bus, to come to the mall. And in the course of writing this story, I talked about what the bus service was. It was the Amherst bus. And I said, even the bus doesn't come from the city of Buffalo. That was an error, a dumb, stupid error. The next day, the bus service and the mall and the city of Buffalo called the paper very angrily, demanded a correction, which they got the next day in a very prominent place. And I was pulled in by my editor and given a dressing down that I remember to this day, right? I mean, basically, I was told I was...
Again, you don't get the right to tell us to trust the media, the government of the 1980s. I mean, the same way that I don't have the right to cast shade on the present day German government because of what they did in the 1940s if there aren't elements of that still in the government. I don't understand his point of view here. Can you guys explain it to me? If you do so in the comments below.
This close to being fired. That's how seriously the paper took the commitment to accuracy in its pages. Now, Matt would have you believe that those two principles are no longer a part of the brief of the mainstream media. I would like to say to him, that's completely false. He is so far removed from the mainstream media that I think he has a naive view about what goes on inside those institutions. They remain committed to a professional set of ideals that they have held for decades. Story number two.
And how do you know that if you're no longer there?
A British podcast this summer, very much a media platform that is not part of the mainstream media. And it was a long 2-hour interview. And in the course of this, my host went on a long and impassioned critique of working from home. And I very briefly chimed in with a few thoughts of my own. I agreed with some of what he said and didn't agree with other things. Thought nothing of it because he occupied about 90% of that conversation. Then in the following week, when the podcast came out, they released a clip which was just of my contribution, making it sound like it was my impassioned rant. And then someone on social media picked it up and said that in the course of this impassioned rant, I had burst into tears, which was not true. And then someone else found a picture. We had moved into new offices, my company, and I had tweeted out a picture of my office because I was so proud of it. And someone took that picture online and said, this is Gladwell's picture of the office he works from home, which was nuts. But everyone believed that too. And so word got around the internet that I was someone who worked from home, believed everyone else should not work from home, and was so overwhelmed emotionally with my hypocrisy that I was close to tears. The height of it was I was trending on Twitter for a while. It was quite an extraordinary experience. The height of it was when some blogger in Philadelphia wrote a story saying this is exactly the kind of hypocrisy you should expect from a single childless man who never leaves his apartment. And so I called it up and said, I'm not single, I'm not childless, and I don't have an apartment, and I go to the office every day and have done so for years. And he said, I'll correct it. But then, of course, he never did. And in the course of the entire controversy, only one reporter called me to try and set the record straight. And where did that reporter work? In the mainstream media. Now, I've been talking, or others have been talking about content, the content of the things that people in the mainstream media say and the problems they have with that content. I don't think the issue here is content. The issue here is process, right? The issue here is the mainstream media has...
Before I lose my thoughts on this, I don't understand what Gladwell is talking about. He's talking about an isolated event. He doesn't tell us who from the mainstream media called him up. Maybe it was Fox News that called him up, somebody who is actually might be devoted to truth, whoever it was. I don't understand what the hell he's talking about, to be honest with you, how he's proving his case that the mainstream media should be trusted. It's not adding up.
As a set of professional norms in place that work the best way they can towards the production of fairness and accuracy. The non-mainstream media is a set of institutions that are outside of that tradition, that have an open and not a closed platform. And you cannot have an open platform and simultaneously adhere to a strict set of professional norms. You cannot say anyone can become a doctor and then complain when the surgeon takes out your spleen.
You know, there's a lot of training that goes into becoming a doctor. Media, a journalist, you go out there and you find the story and you report on it accurately. That is a very open tradition. Anybody can be a journalist. So once again, if you want to talk about elitism and the fact that there's such a high bar that you have to be able to cross in order to call yourself a journalist is being expressed right here. This is the elitism that we talk about.
And thinking that it's your gallbladder, right? Now, why am I making such a big deal about this? Because trust is not about content. Trust is about process. And there is one institution here that it strikes me has a commitment to the right kind of process, and a whole set of other institutions
that in 1980?
most assuredly do not.
Oh my God, what a horrible argument.
Well, first of all, I think I should respond to Michelle, who simply misquoted me, proving my point. I never once said the media doesn't want you to hear about ivermectin. I don't care about ivermectin. What I wrote about was people being deleted from the internet by platforms like Facebook for talking about ivermectin, which I don't believe in. I believe people should be able to talk about what they want.
Yeah, it's called the First Amendment.
The internet.
Word.
You're going to be the second person who's going to owe me a correction after this 538.com has already done that, made that mistake. Malcolm, you seem to think I've never worked in the mainstream media. I spent 15 years at Rolling Stone. I spent all that time writing 7,000-word features that had to be fact-checked every line. I'm absolutely familiar with the process of mainstream media, and that's why I'm so disappointed in what happened. The New York Times and the entire, basically, mainstream media spent years following a fake story about Donald Trump being in league with Vladimir Putin to fix the 2016 election. It was a wrong story. We have a leaked audio tape that was published in Slate.com where the editor of the New York Times says, well, we got caught a little flat-footed on that one because
I mentioned that earlier.
Our readers who want Donald Trump to go away are going to be disappointed about this. He says we built our entire newsroom around one story, and they got it wrong.
And you want to trust them? You want me to trust them?
That kind of inaccuracy, and it only happens if everybody wants so badly for it to be true that they overlook all the guardrails that are in place. No serious journalist that I know looked at that story and didn't have qualms about it. So, yes, there are processes in place, and there was once an ethos in place, but that ethos is gone now. And maybe the processes remain, but there are too many errors proving otherwise.
Exactly. It's not about the process, it's about your reputation. You trust a friend who tells you accuracies over and over again. Not somebody that lies once every 5 times.
I apologize for misquoting you, although I think I've read a lot of your writing on ivermectin, and I know that you've written quite a bit about deplatforming internet censorship. You've also said that we should be reporting on ivermectin. Did you not? Is that incorrect?
That was not the sense of those stories. The idea was Facebook was taking people off the internet for writing about ivermectin, and I was saying
okay. Well, this is something checkable, so we can.
Once again, thank you for wasting our time with this. This is why I'm going to delete you.
First of all, I mean, it's unfortunate that this is not a debate about was Donald Trump's relationships with Russia improper, so that I could be arguing the pro. Side, but I'm not going to go deep into the weeds of that.
Because you fucking got it wrong.
The weeds of the Ottawa trucker protest, because I might have been the only one of us. Did you cover them? No. So I think I might have been the only one of us who was at the Ottawa trucker protest.
I find her so unlikable. Leave your comments. Let me know.
And, you know, I'm the kind of one of the liberal columnists at the Times. I've covered the far right. I showed up at the Ottawa trucker protests kind of expecting the sort of things that I've seen at Donald Trump rallies, at various even further right events, and didn't find it. You know, I was really quite astonished. I think that it's been pretty conclusively shown that the organizers of this protest were people on the far right, were people with very kind of unsavory and sometimes racist.
Okay, so you want to castigate the far right? You want to castigate them as being on the opposite side of the political spectrum than you in order to denigrate your reporting that you did not find what you were expecting at the far right MAGA rallies or whatever you're saying. She is so discrediting herself. She is, okay, you guys leave the comment, but unlikable in my opinion.
Ideas, but what really shocked me walking around and talking to people was how many people were just either totally politically disconnected. I remember getting into a truck with someone saying, "What inspired you to come here?" And he said, "Mushrooms." You know, he had this desire to get in his car and drive, you know, but there was a lot of people who were just traumatized. They were lonely. They were so happy to suddenly be surrounded by people after having been isolated for so long. People were hugging each other. People were hugging me, even though I'm from the hated mainstream media. And I told my editors that this is what I found, and they said, "Great. That's more interesting than what we thought you were going to find." It was more interesting. And I wrote it, and they devoted an entire page to it. I'm not going to defend all of the mainstream media coverage of.
Again, regardless of whether or not you get this one right or wrong, it's the idea that you trust a friend that consistently tells the truth, that doesn't lie to you 1 out of 5 times that they make a statement. That's the point, not your little idiosyncratic story, Michelle, where you're still denigrating everybody who's on the opposite side of the political spectrum as you. The question is, why should we trust you guys?
The Ottawa trucker protests. I didn't follow every single bit of reporting on it in the Canadian media, but I do think that having the ethos of wanting to be surprised and being willing to be surprised is something that you are more likely to find in, you know, the New York Times, in the Washington Post, in people who write, you know, in the New Yorker, than it is with people who do write for some of these contrarian alternatives to the mainstream media, and they really do start with a story that they want to, a story that they intend to tell, often a story about the mistakes and dishonesties of the mainstream media.
But again, if you want to talk about a story that you want to tell, that's why you're denigrating the Canadian leaders of the truckers movement as far right, why you're denigrating the Donald Trump MAGA rallies as far right and the scary people. I mean, this is somebody that obviously has an agenda that's trying to frame her actions as noble.
But the truth is much more complicated than that.
Thank you, Michelle.
Very uninspiring speaker. I've seen her before. Again.
Okay, Douglas, same opportunity for you. 3 minutes on the clock. Let's have your rebuttal.
Thanks very much. I'm delighted you went to the protest. I'm sorry I was on another story at the time. And I'm delighted that you reported honestly, since you didn't report Matt's comments honestly tonight. And the last time you were on this stage with Jordan Peterson, you didn't report his comments accurately either. Let me address the main point that has come out from the other side, which is that the mainstream media has frailties. Sure, it has frailties. And nobody is saying that non-mainstream media don't have frailties. Of course they do. The simple proposal in front of the audience tonight is whether or not you can trust the mainstream media. That is, that you don't need anything else. You don't need any other information from elsewhere. You can just turn on CBC in the evening and you know you've got your stuff. You can pick up the New York Times, the Washington Post in the morning, and you know that there's no spin on the story. It's absolutely accurate reporting. I was interested by Malcolm's story about himself because I wonder, Malcolm, if you hadn't have been yourself, whether you would have got that call from a journalist. I wonder if you weren't yourself, if you weren't a New York Times best-selling author, if you didn't speak to audiences like this. I wonder if you were just an ordinary member of the public who'd been grossly defamed in the mainstream media, whether they'd have bothered with you. I'd submit no. Because time and again, that's been shown to be the case. Now, look, as I say, you don't have to believe this evening that you should never read the mainstream media. What we're simply saying, among other things, is, firstly, the mainstream media isn't the mainstream media that it used to be when we were all, sorry, some of you are a lot younger, but when most of us were growing up, okay? It's just not the same thing. It's running for money, it's running for cash, it's running for ratings and much more. It's just a different mainstream media, and you do need outside sources in that. You do need upstart blogs. You don't only need them, you don't need only read them, but you do need them. The second thing is, again, I come back to it, if the mainstream media today wants to put a spin on a story, they can do it all the way. Look at what happened the other day with the Colorado gay bar shooting in America. Again, we're in Canada, I don't want to talk just about America. Look at this, an appalling event. Somebody goes up and shoots up a gay bar. Whole load of the media start talking about the right wing, about the right-wing shock jocks who've caused this. They go on and on about it day after day until, oh, it turns out the man taken into custody is non-binary.
You know what? I have to address this. The fact that somebody went on CNN, I believe it was, and said it was some trans activist and said that the individual could not be a non-binary because she could tell just by looking at them. It runs afoul of the trans rules. But furthermore, this is what is being presented on the mainstream media. And then they want me to trust them. And yes, exactly. They went on, and they always do whenever they have the opportunity to denigrate the right wing, to take a cudgel to them, even when it's not proven, whether it's Jussie Smollett and this is MAGA country, when he did it to himself and everybody knows it. Oh, they went ahead and they attacked Donald Trump. They went ahead and attacked the Covington kids. This story from the Colorado. There was also a time when there was a shooting. It might have even been in Boulder, Colorado, again, where the individual was in fact a Syrian refugee. But before they knew that, it was on and on and on about the right, radical right, et cetera, et cetera. So Douglas is just pointing out the fact that the mainstream has an agenda, which is why we shouldn't trust them. Let's go back to Douglas. I love this guy.
Story disappears. That would have been a really interesting story to keep on at. But it just goes away because the narrative isn't the one that the mainstream media wanted. It's too complex. So I applaud you, Michelle, when you go and find complex stories and you explain the complexity. But that's not the habit of the mainstream media anymore.
Oh my God, what a brilliant speaker this guy is. He's got gravitas.
Thank you,
who's
Douglas.
the all-star in this debate?
Our last rebuttal is from Malcolm. Malcolm, take us away.
A couple things that I'm puzzled over. One is that I thought that since you guys were in favor of the proposition, you would at some point have given us a definition of what you meant when you used the phrase mainstream media. I'm still waiting for that because What it seems to me that you're doing is you're giving a bunch of very cogent and accurate critiques of the media, but the proposition before us is not that the media behaves nicely and well all the time. It's whether the mainstream media does.
Okay, so he's trying to obscure what we all know to be the mainstream media. You want a definition? You're talking about the New York Times, CNN, those papers, his own Washington Post, those papers, those stations that for decades were trusted, that we all see as mainstream, those whose names we know that have been reporting forever. There's your definition, a-hole.
And without you giving us any direction about what you mean with that phrase, I'm a little lost.
Because you're obscuring it.
Douglas, I noticed in your comments to me right now, you said that would I have been called if I were not who I am? It was a very sort of puzzling locution, but if I were someone else, would I have been called if I had been, quote, and I'm quoting from you, if someone else had been, quote, grossly defamed in the mainstream media? But I wasn't grossly defamed in the mainstream media. I was grossly defamed in the non-mainstream media, which is my point, right? Second thing was I was greatly amused by the affection Matt Taibbi has for the age of Walter Cronkite, which he seemed to hold up as a kind of golden moment. In that moment, the mainstream media was populated entirely by white men from elite schools. Why you would
Here we have race again.
Such affection and say that's the gold standard, and we should trust the mainstream media precisely at the moment when the mainstream media is least representative.
Honestly, who cares about representation if you're getting the story correct or not? Once again, it's about merit. It's about honesty. I don't care what color of skin, black, the guy dunking on me has. I care that he is a better basketball player than me and somebody that I should look up to literally when he's doing so. And that's happened to me, unfortunately. Once again, they're just going back to this racialism. First, he's obscuring what the mainstream media is. Then he's playing the race card, literally. It's just, we need to disavow what took place in the 1950s because it wasn't representative. But that doesn't matter if people trusted it, if they reported the stories accurately. I find this debate to be very one-sided.
Is really puzzling to me. I would point out that at the height of Walter Cronkite's reign in American media, neither people like Michelle and I wouldn't have been on the stage, right? We weren't part of the conversation. So I don't know why we should hold such a kind of affection for that moment.
For the reasons I just explained.
I was also struck by the contradictions between the comments that both of you made. When Douglas said that he was very upset at the way the Canadian media acted as an amen chorus of the Canadian government with respect to the truckers, I would just point out that the reason Walter Cronkite was so beloved by people like Matt Taibbi's father and grandfather is that he was an amen chorus for the United States government. So the two of you should really get together in the next 5 minutes and work out your story. One last comment.
What? They have to work out their story so that they agree because they can't have a different viewpoint?
The particular subjects that seem to have excited the imagination and outrage of the two of you. I'll just list them before I go in my last 19 seconds. Donald Trump's relationship with Russia, the Canadian truckers, ivermectin, Jordan Peterson, and then something about this thing in... These aren't things driven by the mainstream media. These are obsessions of the non-mainstream media. Once again, work it out.
It wasn't the mainstream media, CNN, Washington Post, New York Times, that was reporting breathlessly about Trump being a Russian asset? Is that what you're saying? The fact is that the mainstream media was obsessed with suppressing any story about ivermectin, suppressing the Hunter Biden laptop story, which I'm surprised that they haven't even mentioned yet. I find it to be absolutely one-sided as to who I'm trusting because, as I'm pointing out, I don't believe that the debaters on the con side are doing a good job at all.
Guys, Donald, first of all, are you really saying that Trump's relationship with Russia wasn't not an obsession of mainstream media? It was.
I'm on the same page, obviously.
Content of cable news for 3 years. There was almost, again, the editor of the New York Times, Dean Baquet, said, we built our newsroom around one story, that story. The New York Times doesn't get much more mainstream than that, I don't think.
Kabam, pie in face. Pie in face. debate over. One side completely uncredible.
Defining the mainstream media is simple. I talked before about a bifurcated system where we have essentially two politically homogenous audiences. We have Fox News and conservative media on one side. The mainstream media, roughly speaking, is the other side, right? That's what we mean when we talk about the mainstream media. And yes, as I said in my speech, the old system under Walter Cronkite had its flaws, but it did have its advantages as well. Making the effort to talk to everybody garnered more trust in the public. There is a reason why people trusted news people more 20 or 30 or 40 years ago than they do now. Now, when people meet someone from the New York Times or from the Washington Post or from MSNBC out in middle America, they don't talk to them.
There is no reverence for the position
anymore. Those interviews are very
anymore.
difficult to get now because people perceive those institutions to be not on their side.
Biased.
This is very different. I know this as a campaign reporter myself. I've watched over the years how this has changed. Once upon a time, I could interview for Rolling Stone Republicans with no problem. People loved it. They would always talk about how Dr. Hook was in the cover of Rolling Stone. But over the years, progressively, people became more reserved and they became more distrustful, and they should have been, because the media made more and more mistakes over those years. Think about the WMD episode. We talked about the haloed processes of the mainstream media. Everybody got this wrong, and not only did they get that wrong, after they got it wrong, they promoted all the people who were the most wrong and fired all the people who were the most right. Some of the people were never forgiven for getting that story right, and some of them are editing major magazines today for getting it wrong. So that people have a reason to distrust the media. Of course they do. That's all I have to say.
And Michelle, you're up.
So I guess the point that I keep coming back to is that this critique of the mainstream media, and particularly this critique of the mainstream media, is kind of ideologically blinkered, is itself, I think, rooted in a very simplistic and distorted view of what's happening both in politics and in the relationship between the media and politics. I mean, specifically, the idea that there was nothing to the Trump-Russia story. And I don't want to go too deep in the weeds, but this is bananas. I mean, certainly the Mueller, people put too much hope. People who despise Trump put too much hope in.
Hope. Again, there is the narrative. That is what she's feeling inside. They put too much hope in the process of attempting to eliminate the president. This is her ideological possession that is coming out once again. Unlikable one.
That Mueller would bring him to justice. But what we've learned, I remember when this report first came down that there was kind of concern in the intelligence agencies about Trump's relationship with Russia. If we had at that moment known that Donald Trump's campaign asked Russia for help in asked Russia for help in the election, if we had known that Donald Trump was seeking to do a huge business deal in Moscow and seeking.
So again, she's spending her 2 minutes defending their obsession with this story, which Malcolm Gladwell stated. How can you accuse the media of being obsessed? And Matt just threw that pie right back in her face, and she's got pie all over hers. So she's trying to defend herself. F her. Just such a horrible debater.
Putin's assistance. If we had known at that moment that his campaign manager, who before then had managed the campaign of pro-Russian candidates in Ukraine, if we had known that his campaign manager was passing intelligence to somebody who was believed to be a KGB agent, and if we had known that Russia then did hack and leak.
Why don't you give the same attention to the Hunter Biden laptop story, which you didn't for 2 effing years?
The emails of the Democratic candidate for president, we would have thought, well, this is an astonishing blockbuster. And so it's really much more complicated than that. Finally, about Club Q, nobody believes that he is non-binary. If they did, they would think that this was a fascinating story and would love to report it. The media loves counterintuitive stories.
According to trans law, if you say you're non-binary, you are non-binary.
more than it loves ideologically convenient stories. It's simply that everyone knew that he was trolling us when he said that. Thank you.
Okay, Douglas, let's have your second rebuttal.
Thank you. Would that they were still interested in that nuance, Michelle. Would that they were. Malcolm Gladwell said we need to define mainstream media. If we haven't, it's because I spoke to the organizers before this tonight saying, are we going to spend the whole of the debate debating what the mainstream media definition should be? And they assured me not. But we can do. Let me do it in shorthand. The mainstream media, in my view, would be, for instance, things like government-subsidized media that say what the government wants them to say. I would say that it was the legacy media, the newspapers we used to trust once and we don't trust anymore, the ones that used to be the papers of record and which have slowly descended into just partisan hackery of whatever their own particular peccadillos are that month. Malcolm, you did a little nasty jab there, I noticed, at Matt, by trying to pretend that Matt Taibbi is desperate for the era of white men in broadcasting. Takes a certain chutzpah to make that claim, but I don't see any reason why that is the case with Matt. I don't think that you are hankering desperately for a world of white news presenters. We've only just met, but you didn't give off that vibe to me. And when Malcolm says you've got to get your story right, guys, I know it's easy for a cheap laugh line, but I don't see why we do. We're two very different people with very different careers, interests, and much more. We've trodden very different paths across very wide swathes of this planet. And we don't need to get our story straight for you, or for this audience tonight, or be in lockstep. Differences of opinion, including on the same side, used to be cherished.
He's so brilliant. It's just, look at the way he stops and pauses.
I could do that more,
for
but
the applause. Just brilliant.
Thank you. Okay, let's get our last rebuttal here from Malcolm. 2 minutes. Take us away.
I
Can't
was
wait to see what this has.
astonished to listen as Matt Taibbi doubled down on his defense of.
I'm sorry, Matt Taibbi. Do you not know this, Malcolm Gladwell? Are you intentionally getting his name wrong every single time? You don't even know your opponent in a debate, who is frankly a rather famous journalist, a profession which you proclaim that you are a part of or were. I like some of the books that you write, to be fair to you, but I find that to be rather disrespectful.
Walter Cronkite. I feel like there should be a giant picture of Walter Cronkite behind. And he said,
You're not funny
the most
either.
incredible quote was, Walter Cronkite, the era of that era in journalism was distinguished by journalists, quote, making the effort to talk to everybody. Now, he's talking about the 1950s and 60s. I just wanted to make a short list of the people who were not spoken to.
Let me guess.
By
Racial? Is this going to go racial?
60s.
Let me guess. Oh, my God.
You may want to add some if I miss some. Black people.
Victory! This is how you win a debate on the left. Go racial.
Gay people.
Oh, there you go. Gay people.
People with mildly left-wing
So
views.
boring.
I mean, words fail me when somebody, when it presented with a critique of his rather idiosyncratic position on Walter Cronkite, comes back and says, oh, no, there's more to my great love of this man. The other thing that struck me in their comments was there's a weird obsession with the two of them with the notion that the media occasionally gets things wrong. And I wonder if they have confused the role of journalists with that of stockbrokers. Stockbrokers have to get their predictions right, but journalists don't. The job of a journalist is to use that famous phrase, to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. And sometimes that means you go down some dead ends and you chase stories that don't turn out as you want them or wish them or hope that they would turn out. But that is the nature of the business. And if that business seems uncomfortable to you, then I would suggest you should go into stockbroking.
Okay. He is so dismissive. And I don't know about that journalism quote, but I do know that it's a journalist's job to get something right, to be honest, and to try to be as to try to report with as much veracity as possible. And what he is doing, once again, and I pointed out previously, he's obscuring. He's making things nebulous and appealing to emotion and race. This is leftism being presented by this man who, frankly, again, writes pretty damn good books. I'm a little bit disappointed, very disappointed in Malcolm Gladwell, because I've seen him speak and I liked him previously when I listened to him. Right now, I find him as repulsive as Michelle Goldberg.
Let me come to you first, Matt, because I want to pick up on an argument that Malcolm made earlier tonight, that this is about this debate and the issue of trust. Because let's get back to our resolution, be it resolved, don't trust mainstream media. For some in Malcolm and Michelle's camp, it's about a process. It's about a commitment to a learning, a teaching, a profession. Why isn't that a reason to
it's
feel
about
that
trust?
There
That's
is
the
something
question.
very special about the mainstream media versus Substack, where you work, where, I don't know, I assume those types.
Simply because you can employ the same principles when you're writing Substack as you can in a newsroom. You can have somebody fact check you. You can do many of these things, and you can try to report honestly, which obviously these two are blatantly dishonest and race mongering on the opposite side.
Things are somewhat arbitrary as to whether your fellow contributors on Substack really care about fact checking or care about searching out the other side to a story or to an opinion.
Well, first of all, let's talk about process. Michelle brought up the assistant to Donald Trump's campaign manager, Konstantin Kilimnik. She called him a suspected Russian agent. Right. Yeah. He was also, we know definitely he was a source for the U.S. State Department, but his name, Konstantin Kilimnik, was splashed all over the news for a year. Do you know how many reporters called him? 2. Aaron Mate, a Canadian journalist, by the way, and myself. Nobody called him. This person who's supposedly the linchpin of the entire conspiracy, his telephone number is public. It's in the Senate report. Nobody from the Senate called him. Robert Mueller didn't call him. Nobody from the New York Times called him. It was left to a couple of independent journalists to do it, which to me suggests that there's something going on process-wise that's a little different from the way things used to be. Once upon a time, I think journalists were more interested in what was true and what was not true than whether or not this fit the narrative or not. And I think what happened with the Trump-Russia story is, what's the upside for a lot of these institutions to call up somebody like Konstantin Kilimnik and find out his side of the story? Is that going to get on the front page of the New York Times? Probably not. And so, yes, there are processes. Fact-checking is important. I do it. I hire fact-checkers to do it. But
what I was saying.
This is not the standard process for all mainstream media institutions anymore. We don't do it as much as we used to. Part of that is for financial reasons.
Wait, I can't sit here and let you make these statements that without any kind of, we don't do that as much as we used to for financial reasons. I mean, I worked at the New Yorker. The New Yorker, if anything, spends more money on fact-checking today than it did in the past. I would have thought, with my first book, I didn't hire a fact-checker, but then I observed the number of errors in it. I also observed that the nature of the journalism world in which we live, the scrutiny of journalists is such that it's really perilous not to have a fact-checker. And so now I have fact-checkers. Many other people, I think, have observed the same thing, that there is now so much attention paid to the accuracy of things that writers say that you'd better make sure you don't have errors in your. So, I mean, Matt, I understand that you do have this wonderful nostalgia for the way things used to be, but
Again, he goes back
I think
there.
that you need to fact check some of your nostalgic notions about the wonderful world of the 1950s.
Oh my
who
God!
was watchdogging the New York Times in the 1950s? Nobody was. It was a tiny little universe of people now watchdog institutions like that, and so they have a higher commitment to the truth.
obviously.
So first of all, hold on, Matt. Let's bring Douglas in on this. I just want to hear his voice.
Doug is speechless.
I'm never speechless. It's not a problem I suffer from. I can't sit here and listen to Malcolm Gladwell talking about fact-checking and the importance of it. Not to get too mean, Malcolm. I read your book, David and Goliath. The chapter on Northern Ireland is more filled with inaccuracies than any other chapter in a non-fiction book I have read. It is, having written a not very well-selling but widely acclaimed book on Northern Ireland myself, my book on Northern Ireland didn't sell anywhere near as much as yours did, Malcolm, but mine was filled with facts. And
Well, now.
your chapter on Northern Ireland was so filled with inaccuracies. Irish historians ripped it apart. Would that you had a fact checker, Malcolm. Would that you did your own research. But anyway, let me get back to another point.
I must say, you do a very good job of it. But you must say, you do have a tendency to accuse those who disagree with your opinion.
No, it's not disagreement.
Of being
it's not disagreement, Malcolm. You didn't know that the provisional IRA were responsible for 60% of the deaths in the Troubles. There were basic things you just didn't know, Malcolm.
No.
I'm sorry, it's not my fault, it's yours. And your fact checkers.
I didn't know that the function of this debate was to rehash the accuracy of a chapter in a book that I wrote 12 years ago.
Well, you were the one that started talking about fact checkers. I'm simply saying, why don't you employ some?
I suspect
or your publishers.
Douglas,
why don't I make the point I wanted to make other than that?
Briefly, yes. Good Lord.
Take the Hunter Biden story.
Oh, here we go. I'm sorry.
Oh, they finally got to it. I'm shocked
you don't want to
that they went an hour without getting to it.
Of course you don't want to hear it, Malcolm. Of course you wouldn't, because it goes against your ideological presumptions.
Bum, bum, bum,
That
bum.
story was a big story, okay? It was a big story. The New York Post, which I write for, but the New York Post, America's oldest newspaper, was silenced on Twitter, was silenced across the media. You know, the Washington Post has now picked it up. It's saying that, the laptop...
2 years late!
But why didn't the media pick it up before? Why didn't they call up people? Why didn't they check whether the emails
Because they wanted
were accurate?
Biden to get elected.
Because they didn't want Biden to lose the election. He was
Same
their
thing.
guy. And they weren't going to screw that up. Now, I ask you...
Can I respond to that?
Not only that. Okay, this is an important allegation, and I knew the Hunter Biden laptop was going to come up. It had to land, so it's landed at just the right time. So, Michelle, let's come to you on this, because I think many people
I do want to talk about the Hunter Biden laptop, because I actually was telling Malcolm, we were talking this morning, and I said, I bet they're going to want to talk about the Hunter Biden
Oh,
laptop.
gee, you wonder. You're talking about media veracity and honesty.
Who would
You
care
think?
about
You
that?
think?
But I want to say this about the Hunter Biden laptop, because again, I feel like this story is this is a revisionist history. I mean, let's remember.
The people that don't want to talk about the Hunter Biden laptop, it's like if I were to cheat on my wife and my wife were to be distrustful of me, and I'd say, oh my God, you want to talk about that boring moment a year ago when I had an indiscretion? Oh, how boring. Why don't you leave it and forget about it? God. And you wonder why my wife wouldn't trust me for the same reason that we don't trust these clowns.
What happened with the Hunter Biden laptop? The person who wrote the New York Post story asked to have their name taken off of it because they thought the story was unreliable.
How do you know that? Or maybe that's what they said, but maybe they didn't want to get death threats from Antifa.
People who had the hard drive would not give it to the Washington Post and the New York Times before the election. So
you know who had the hard drive? The FBI. And they had plenty of time to verify whether or not it was accurate. And they went out of their way to squash the story. They went out of the way to poison the well at the social media companies, which we know now, based on the Twitter files and what Mark Zuckerberg admitted on Joe Rogan.
You're basically saying, why didn't they rely on the post reporting that the reporter himself considered unreliable? And I went back through some of this stuff because I figured we'd be talking about this. The Washington Post, yes, has been able to confirm they hired forensic experts, were able to confirm some of the emails on the Hunter Biden laptop and some of the other material. There's I don't think anyone's
Tony Bobulinski went on Tucker Carlson right after evidence of the laptop surfaced via the New York Post. Nobody, not one of these ass clowns in the mainstream media called Tony Bobulinski for an interview to verify, to question whether or not it was true or not. So anything that she says after this is going to be an utter atrocious fallacy and covering their tracks, which is all that she's there to do.
Disputing that Hunter Biden is a, both corrupt and troubled person. But I just want to, I wrote this down because I thought this might come up. Among the reasons for the inconclusive findings was the sloppy handling of the data, which damaged some records. The experts found that the data had been repeatedly accessed and copied by people other than Hunter Biden over nearly 3 years. Blah, 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 the FBI. The security experts who examined the data for the Post struggled to reach definitive conclusions about the contents as a whole, including whether all of it originated from a single computer or could have been assembled from files from multiple computers and put on the portable drive. So the media has covered this, but they have also been, I think, careful, given the fact that this stuff still cannot be authenticated.
They were careful. Do you think that they'd be so careful if this was reversed and it was Donald Trump and his son? Do you really think that they'd be careful? Do you not think that they would get right down to business and verify it within hours? Would you not think that they'd be calling up every single source? Oh, gee, I wonder. What do you guys think? Leave it in the comments. Thumb up the video, by the way.
And I spoke at the very beginning about the media kind of trying to self-correct, sometimes to a fault. And when there was a leak, when Hillary Clinton's emails were leaked and emails from the DNC were leaked in 2016, I mean, I was at the Democratic convention, and you sort of saw how it turned the mood, how it soured the mood, how it angered so many of the Bernie Sanders supporters. So it had a real impact on the way that race unfolded. And I think that in retrospect, a lot of media came to see that how that material was obtained and how it was kind of strategically disseminated was as important of a story as the contents of those emails.
The story wasn't important at the time. It was denied by all of the left-wing outlets. You had 51 former intelligence officers that went on every single media channel and declared it to be having all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. They, once again, never called up Tony Bobulinski. What a liar, 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 pants on fire.
And that they had made a mistake by only focusing on the latter. And so they didn't want to make the same mistake again with the Hunter Biden laptop. And you were arguing, it seems to me, that they should have.
Yeah, so guys,
you mean they didn't want
to
lose the election for the Democrats? That's what they didn't want to do.
A campaign of successful disinformation run by a foreign government against a candidate running for President of the United States could, in a sense, be replicated again in the Biden laptop. Maybe that was not the case in the end, but wasn't that a responsible thing that only the mainstream media would have done, taking a more cautious approach to uncertainty when reporting the news?
Okay. First of all, the 2016 campaign was not disinformation. It wasn't fake. Those emails were real. They were all authentic. The manner of how they were obtained was shady, but they were true. So you can't call it disinformation. Neither was this. This was not disinformation. And news organizations are not required to report on anything. No one has to do the story on the Hunter Biden laptop if they don't want to. They're not obligated to. However, they went beyond not covering it. They wrote stories that this was Russian disinformation. They repeated the statements made by 50 former intelligence officials who described this as having all the earmarks of a Russian information campaign.
Sorry, guys. For the record, I think that Matt makes a better debater than me because I get a little bit more emotional. I'm not sure whether that is good or bad, but it certainly is a double-edged sword at minimum. But he's saying basically the same things that we're all thinking.
By the way, they didn't use the word disinformation. But that wasn't even the most important part of the story. The important part of that story wasn't even about Hunter Biden. It was about the decision by Facebook and Twitter at the behest, at least in the case of Facebook, of the U.S. government to quash or dial down that story and deny access to that story. That is a historic moment.
It's a direct violation of our First Amendment. And it's fascist. It is fascism, the merger of corporation and state.
I've got to add to that. I've got to add that. Sorry, Malcolm, you're kind of, oh my God, what a yawneroo the whole Hunter Biden story is. How boring to talk about the idea of corruption at an epic scale in the first family. How boring. Who would want to harp on about that? Let me try the counterfactual on you. It's October 2020. And a huge number of emails are suddenly dumped, revealing unbelievable scandal in the Trump family. I don't want to concentrate on the dick pics and the crack and the stuff. Never mind about Don Jr. if he'd been doing that. Let's just focus on the emails. There was a very easy way, Michelle, as you know, to certify whether this stuff was true. You could call up anyone on the email chains and say, "Did you get this email?" They didn't bother with any of that stuff. They
didn't want to.
Excited as hell across most of the mainstream media, if this had been emails from Donald Trump's son saying, and I'm no Trump fan, let's not get into that cheap rut. But if it had been Don Jr. saying to his child, "You've no idea what I've done for this family, the demeaning things I've gone through, I have to give half of everything I earn to my dad." Oh, you're Nauru, definitely. Who'd care about that? No, the point is simply that this was one of the occasions in recent years where the mainstream media showed its transparency as a political organization.
And why you shouldn't trust them, which is what is at stake here. That is the question. Do we trust them?
This is a key point of the debate that I think, Malcolm, is on a lot of audience members' minds. Why is it when these mistakes, or in case maybe this wasn't a mistake, a sudden cautiousness emerges, why does it always seem to, if we look at the circumstances over the last few years, benefit one political orientation and seem to disadvantage?
Because the media is merely a propaganda network today.
Do you guys remember, butthurt emails? I mean, does anybody remember the completely outsized attention paid to Hillary Clinton's information security protocols in the run-up to the 2016 election? I mean, this was on the front page of the New York Times constantly. This was just an absolute drumbeat that the most important thing in the 2016 election was Hillary Clinton having a private email server. I mean, the idea that these distortions always benefit Democrats and work against Republicans,
sorry, that's
is
been
simply
proven.
Not the case. Again,
That's
I apologize for making this so, kind of America-centric. And I would similarly say, BuzzFeed published the Steele dossier after the 2016 election, but it was floating around before then, and people didn't report on it because they couldn't verify any of it. So
then why did you run with it for 3.5 years? Biatch.
But the idea that the media is, the idea that these mistakes always run in one direction, it is simply not the case.
Do you want to come in on this one?
God.
Well, I was struck once again in listening to our opponents by how much their arguments resemble the kind of classic structure of a conspiracy theory.
So now you get to call them conspiracy theories.
Is a theory
Stuff that has been proven.
A degree of unanimity and collaboration amongst one's foes, right? The conspiracist speaks of those who disagree with himself or herself as if they had a single voice. And there are numerous really unpleasant examples of this. This is not one of those. This is a much milder, more naive variant on the traditional conspiratorial
now you're
model.
just dismissing
but
it?
Nonetheless, when Matt and Doug speak about the mainstream media, they're acting as if there's a big room, possibly.
I'm sorry. He just called him Doug. Everybody knows he goes by Douglas. He's been called Douglas throughout the debate. He calls Matt Taibbi. He calls him Matt Taibbi or whatever he does. At some point, it just becomes dismissive and bad debate practice and disrespectful.
In New York or in Washington, D.C., or maybe in between, so that each party has equal access to the room, in which everyone gathers every morning and makes up the agenda for the day, right? And the people fly in from the big news networks, and someone from CBC comes down, and this cabal of high-minded, well-paid, elite white, as it turns out, journalists. Some of them,
there you go. There you go. Once again, another cheap race shot.
And set the agenda for the country. Now, I don't know where this room is. I said,
when did the debate you just get to say F you to somebody? Because that's what Malcolm Gladwell deserves right now. He deserves a slap across the face for repeatedly taking a cheap shot at Matt's supposedly white supremacist urges that he has deep inside his heart. What a horrible man.
I speculated that maybe it's in Maryland because that would be equidistant between these two places. But this is a fantasy, right? A conspiratorial fantasy. The truth is that the elements, and this is why I made a big point about their failure to define.
Have you ever noticed how they always repeat the same story, giving it the same framing throughout the media? Do you not think that that is completely random when it happens over and over again? Like with Gage Grosskreutz, they call him a victim of all over the media of Kyle Rittenhouse. Do you not think that every time that you see a story framed in the exact same manner, that there isn't something possibly conspiratorial about that, or that they get their directives from on high? It's so easy to disseminate such a narrative today. I don't know.
Find what the mainstream media is, and it's a crippling failure because they never really grasped and told us what they were talking about. They were free to construct this mythological thing where all these people get together and set the agenda. There is no thing, and there is no agenda. There are a variety of disparate voices, and they have chosen to cherry pick and create this complete mythology.
It's so strange. It's so strange hearing you debate, Malcolm, because you listen to nothing that your opponents say. It's quite extraordinary. I've met it before, but never quite so badly as it occurs in you.
He deserves to be dismissed.
Things that neither of us have said, and then you try to pathologize what we say. You decide to say things like, "Oh, it's a conspiracy theory. If it comes from this side, it's a conspiracy theory." You say, "We don't do our research. We're just conspiracy theorists." Apparently mild dose of it, he says, in his excellent medical-like analysis of his opponents. We just have a mild dose. No, Malcolm, why don't you listen to what comes out of our mouths and try to learn something from it, as I am with you this evening? But at the moment, all I get is you dismissing every single story we come up with, every egregious failure of the mainstream media. I've given you a definition of what I think of as the mainstream media, so your attempt to claim that we haven't answered it yet is just another straw man in your massive legion of straw men you keep creating this evening. But I beg you to actually consider the fact that what we are describing is, even if you think not as accurate as you would like, an expression of a problem that is going on in our societies. Functioning liberal democracies need to have trust in their media. And the best that your side has been able to come up with so far tonight is to say, we get things wrong quite often, but you should trust us.
He's a brilliant debater. God, he has gravitas. He's just
where do we find trust, Matt? I mean, do we find trust in Substack? I'm generally curious about that. Where, if it's not mainstream media, which we traditionally have turned to, for better or worse, to seek out facts that are widely understood to be true, then where does that truth factory now exist, or does it not exist at all?
It doesn't come from an institution. The only way, there's no shortcut to trust in media. The only way to get it is by doing a good job over and over and over again.
Ding, ding,
not
ding,
getting
ding.
Things wrong.
It's
and
that
when
friend
get
that you
wrong,
trust.
Admitting it. There's no other way to do it in media. And
just because you have the New York Times banner, I used to believe that the New York Times was the gold standard of journalism, and I would believe when I was in college everything that was written on those pages. That was my association with them. Obviously, they've broken it since, and it is like, again, that friend that you have, that friend that you absolutely trust inherently because you know that he has your best interest at heart and he never lies. And if he gets something wrong, you attribute it to that usually rather than he lied. And it's very easy to get over it because he probably has a good explanation. Not these clowns.
The mainstream media, what we're talking about tonight, has repeatedly gotten things wrong, not admitted it, not owned up to it. I mean, Malcolm is talking about conspiracy theories. Let's talk about a story that was huge in America for years. This idea that Donald Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen, was making visits to Prague. Now, this came from the infamous Steele dossier. If you read the dossier, basically the idea is Trump sent his lawyer to go meet with hackers and Kremlin representatives in Prague. And Steele says that they would preferably be Romanian hackers who would afterwards retreat to Bulgaria, where they could use that country as a bolt hole to lie low. If that's not a conspiracy theory, I don't know what is. This story was taken seriously by every major news organization in America for years on end with no evidence. And he accuses us of being conspiracy theorists. It's preposterous.
Let's just.
And again, it's elitist. It's the same thing that I said earlier in the debate, where we are on high and I judge you to be the conspiracy theorist by what you bring. It's a mild dose. And as Douglas Murray so eloquently pointed out, it's like getting a diagnosis from your doctor. It's a mild conspiracy theory.
Do you guys acknowledge, or do you fear, are you concerned about the extent to which mainstream media now is a plaything of some very powerful corporate interests that may not have the interests of citizens or their democracy at heart?
I think that that's obviously true. Right? I think that that's inarguable. I would be surprised if there was any difference of opinion between us on that. I don't think that that's something, it's something that is new in terms of the scale of the wealth, because, we live in an age of ever escalating inequality, but it's not a new thing that very rich people have controlled the press. That's been true for as long as there has been a press in this country. I do think, however, that when you asked before about how you restore trust, and again, I know I keep saying this. I apologize if this is not totally relevant to the Canadian context, where you have, kind of media organizations funded by the government. In the United States, where you don't have that, except for things like Voice of America and NPR, one of the biggest crises in terms of trust in the mainstream media, I believe, has sort of very little to do with ideology and much more to do with corporate consolidation. There's been an absolute decimation of local media, and that doesn't just kind of impoverish our view of what's going on in the country. It impoverishes the industry, because that used to be the way that you came up in journalism. You started working at a local small town paper, you moved to a bigger one, maybe you ended your career at somewhere like New York Times or the Boston Globe or the LA Times. But it gave people, my father's also a journalist, it gave people like my father, who didn't go to an Ivy League school. I didn't either, but who, sort of wasn't a great student, but was really into sports and started out as a sports reporter and then became a crime reporter. You had a non-elite path into the mainstream media. It was much more of a blue-collar profession because of the structure of it, because of the way you sort of learned the craft. And it also cultivated trust, because you could see for yourself if the world that the newspaper or the local news was describing was the world that you saw. You would see people you knew, things that were happening in their community reflected in the newspaper. And so you would be able to develop a kind of different relationship. You knew journalists, you saw journalists in your community. That has been decimated, but that is not a story of left-wing ideological capture. That is a story of kind of amok capitalism and plutocracy.
Thanks, Michelle. Well said. So a similar question for you guys, which is, there's another billionaire out there who's got his hands on a media platform. His name is Elon Musk, and it's called Twitter. So, don't we need the mainstream media even more in the face of Elon Musk's Twitter 2.0?
Well, no. The issue with Twitter is about whether or not there are hands secretly on the levers behind the algorithms. And the problem with Twitter as a platform in recent years, as I think everybody who studied it knows, is that there has been a prioritization of certain accounts, shadow banning, all sorts of stuff
which Twitter, since this debate, I believe, has been absolutely proven.
It was. And, of course, the usual political bias. Now, you can see the political bias in the people who are coming back on Twitter since Elon Musk took it over. There are no cancelled left-wing accounts coming back on, because mostly it wasn't left-wing accounts that were getting cancelled. It was right-wing ones, conservative ones, including ones I have no taste for or appetite for. But the fact is that there was a shadow game going on at Twitter. And we will discover in the coming weeks, as Elon makes the discoveries clearer, we will discover exactly what that looked like. How behind the scenes Twitter was able to lean to subdue certain accounts, certain
And we
stories,
know that they
how
did
it was
now.
able to promote other ones. But that's if I can say so, a slightly separate question to this one. Hopefully Twitter and other social media companies would simply allow a flourishing of the media so that everyone can have their say. It would not be something, for instance, which decided that if a conservative newspaper drops a very big story before an election, you lock that newspaper out of its account for weeks on end.
Okay. Okay, let's go to closing statements. We're going to take these in the opposite order of the opening. 3 minutes on the clock for each of you. I'm going to leave the stage, and Malcolm, pass it over to you to kick us off for the closing statements. Thank you.
Thank you. Here's what I think the debate boils down to, and that is that our opponents believe that the mainstream media they're concerned that the mainstream media, to the extent that they have told us what it is
Oh my
filled
God.
with people who don't think like they do, and that fact makes them
To the extent that they've told them what it is. Sorry, Douglas already addressed this.
uncomfortable. And in support of this, they have given us a long list of rather predictable hot-button topics taken from their Twitter feed.
So when I'm presenting evidence that somebody doesn't deserve to get into heaven, if I'm St. Peter, I should ignore the fact that he murdered somebody, that he cheated on his wife, that he diddled little kids, that he was Sam Bankman-Fried and stole $8 billion from people, which the New York Times, of course, glosses over and tries to blame elsewhere because, of course, they are corrupted by his money. This is what you're talking about, that it's predictable hot button issues. This is how they dismiss it.
And my question was, what would make them happy? So what would restore the trust of Matt and Doug in the mainstream media? And I think what
he has to correct him,
answers,
Douglas.
Would like, if the world resembled 1955 again, that would fill him with joy. Doug would like more stories on the Hunter Biden laptop.
4 times they're going to play the race
but more
card?
seriously,
Really?
I think that
Yeah,
they would be
because that's all they
happier
have.
if they felt that the composition of prestigious journalistic institutions more closely reflected the full range of ideological attitudes in the American public. That is actually a serious proposition. I don't mean to make light of it at all. But it is one that makes me a little uncomfortable.
Because you are
I don't
ideologically
think
possessed.
That you can ultimately say that trust in institutions is reserved solely for institutions that perfectly match the characteristics of the general population.
Oh, right. But only for race. You need everything to match up for race because everybody has to be represented. But, ways of thinking, there needs to be no diversity around that topic. Does there, Malcolm? God, these people are such hypocrites. I despise their thinking.
It's like saying that we don't trust kindergarten teachers because kindergarten teachers are overrepresented with people who have an enormous amount of patience for temper tantrums of 4-year-olds. I mean, they are an extraordinary
So is he not conflating people that react negatively to the New York Times to temper tantrums of 4-year-olds? That kind of seems what he just did. God.
Very specific subgroup of the population that performs very well in that particular task. More generally, though, when we say of journalists, that I don't think we should be judging the quality and trustworthiness of journalists by the composition of that group or by their private ideological positions. I believe that in a liberal society that we have to believe that the people who compose our professions can place their professional obligations above their personal.
You're asking us to believe something that has been proven not to be the case, but you want us to believe. You want us to give our undying belief in your honesty when it's been proven time and time again. Once I said, I'm going to say it again, that you have abdicated that responsibility.
Ideological positions. And if you don't believe we are capable of that act of transformation, then you can't have trust in any of the institutions that make up liberal society.
Thank you for that closing statement, Malcolm. We're now going to go to Douglas. Same opportunity, 3 minutes on the clock.
Well, Malk.
Thank you. A little slap across the face, well deserved.
I'm going to try to take this more seriously than you did in your endless creation of straw men, which just is ceaseless this evening, and address what I think is the real problem we have in our century in terms of information technology. Having different opinions is so 20th century. This century, we have different facts, and it's lethal.
Yeah.
It's absolutely lethal to the functioning of society. And if you want to see how lethal it is, look at the situation in America, where not just the media, but every institution, the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, the Supreme Court, every institution, you decide whether it's for your side or not. It's disastrous for society.
It is.
But it starts with the facts. And when the facts go wrong, or you become glib about them, or decide that it's just the facts that will suit your side, or pretend you're playing a game of honesty and are not actually playing a game of honesty, everything else in the society can go to hell. Yeah. This side has not been saying any of these straw men that you've been so kindly creating this evening, Malcolm. We've been saying that the mainstream media cannot be trusted. That is all. We're not saying don't read it. I repeat, we're not saying don't absorb it. Of course, you'd be an idiot to say that. What, you think we're only going to read Substacks for the rest of life? There's not even time. But the mainstream media is currently failing. It is failing you, the public. It is failing its employees. It's failing at its central task. You quoted one example of what journalism was meant to consist of. I would quote another, what George Orwell said. It's out on his statue outside the BBC. Sadly, the employees do not read it every morning before going in. But George Orwell famously said that the job of a journalist was to tell people facts they don't want to hear. The problem we have in our century coming up is that people will be paying for and absorbing only the facts they want to hear. The argument we are making is one of hygiene, basic hygiene in the media, in the mainstream media. I don't want to blow it up. I don't want an end to it or anything like it. I spent a significant amount of my life in the mainstream media. We just want it to be honest. We just want it to be factual. We don't want it to chase its own prejudices. We just want it to speak truth, whatever that is. That's not so radical.
What a brilliant, eloquent man. Forceful, gravitas, great debater. He gets an A+.
Thank you, Douglas.
Wow.
Michelle, thank you for an excellent debate. Let's
No,
have your closing remarks, please.
Lie. He must be mainstream media.
Okay.
Excellent debate. Lie.
So I think that I don't necessarily disagree with Douglas that this kind of constant hygiene is necessary, that journalists need to, I don't even know if objectivity is the right frame, but there does need to be a sort of a constant conversation, institutional constraints, as well as, kind of a certain professional pride in being able to distinguish between what you hope is true and what you actually find. The argument that I want to make is that it is only the mainstream media that sort of has that ethos. If you read conservative media, you will not often find, occasionally you will, but I think in general, you will not often find a lot of stuff that conservatives don't want to hear. I mean, likewise, if you read a blog devoted to the various... if you
read the New York Times, you won't, because it's all about money today.
The Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, or whatever, they're not going to suddenly say, oh, I thought they got that story wrong, but when I looked at it again, they really got it right. I know from being in newsrooms, from being around journalists, that there is a hunger out there to find the counterintuitive story, to find the unusual story. Very recently, the New York Times did a big piece on puberty blockers that made a lot of our readers extremely angry. The piece was about, that these are kind of given to kids who either, kind of are transgender or believe that they're transgender to pause puberty, and then later on, if they decide to kind of continue with their transition, they can start on cross-sex hormones. And the piece featured 3 children. One of them was a trans girl who from a very early age had identified as female, who went on puberty blockers, later started estrogen, was very glad, she and her family were very glad not to have to go, that she hadn't had to go through a male puberty, and this was clearly the right thing for her.
So confusing
There
listening
was
to this.
another young woman who had kind of her...
Is she really going to rehash this story? Is she really going to point to one specific article that nobody's read here rather than the broader scope and trying to defend the media? This is just bad debating.
Doubts about her gender coincided with other psychological troubles, and she had started puberty blockers and then started testosterone, but later decided that she wasn't actually male and that this had been kind of a grievous mistake and that she feels like the process had been too rushed. There was a 3rd child who developed significant bone density issues and ended up going off puberty blockers for those reasons. And now
Hey, Biatch, get to the fucking point.
Oh, sorry, I don't understand what you're... I just want to say very quickly, this is... Who else has an incentive to do a story about all the complications and the things that we don't know?
Anybody with a mind who's seeking truth? What a horrible debater.
Thank you, everybody. We're going to give the last word in this debate to Matt Taibbi. Matt, take us home.
First of all, just quickly, the notion that the New York Times should be patted on the back for doing this story like the Hunter Biden story years late, after all the people who had touched that subject were ostracized and in some cases actually thrown out of the mainstream media. They're working on podcasts now as opposed to working for big magazines like they had before. This is Douglas was writing about this years ago.
So was I.
I think it's a little odd to give yourself credit for a story
I didn't write it. I'm not giving myself credit.
All right, fine.
Shut up.
Look, tonight we talked a lot about whether or not you should trust the mainstream media, but for the business, there's a more urgent question, which is, do people trust the mainstream media? And we already have an answer. This is the headline from a recent Gallup Trusted Media survey. Americans' trust in media remains near record low. Washington, D.C., Dateline. At 34%, Americans trust in mass media to report the news, quote, fully, accurately, and fairly, is essentially unchanged from last year and just 2 points higher than the lowest that Gallup has recorded in 2016 during the presidential campaign. Just 7% of Americans have a great deal of trust and confidence in media, and 27% have a fair amount. Meanwhile, 28% of U.S. adults say they do not have much confidence, and 38% have none at all in newspapers, TV, and radio. Notably, this is the first time that the percentage of Americans with no trust at all in media is higher than the percentage with a great deal or a fair amount combined. So, whatever the reason, mainstream media has an enormous trust problem. And it's doing an ostrich act. It's pretending it's not happening. It's pretending that it's somebody else's fault. When you're a writer, when you're a journalist, and people don't trust you, it's always your fault. It's always a communication problem. You can look back. I remember covering the 2016 presidential campaign. The news media couldn't have gotten that story more wrong for longer. First, every single data journalist said with absolute certainty that Donald Trump would never be the Republican nominee. Nate Silver from 538.com said that Donald Trump would play in the NBA before he'd be the Republican nominee. Then they gave him no chance to win the general election. And after that happened, they should have looked inside and said, what did we get wrong? How did we miss this? Well, you missed it because you're living in a bubble and you're no longer in contact with the rest of America. And that's the problem with the media today.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for those closing statements. Now we're getting an opportunity to vote on a second time on our motion today. So pull out your smartphones. Debaters are not allowed. And you're going to text the word MUNK, M-U-N-K, to 37607 if you're not already registered with our poll system. There's also a QR code in your program. You can scan the QR code and activate the second vote on our audience motion tonight. Be it resolved, do not trust the mainstream media. While we let that vote build, let's just quickly review where we started out tonight's debate. It was pretty much a split opinion. If those numbers held, they may have counted a few more votes over the intervening period of time, but I believe it was 52-48. Let's see if we can get the first audience vote back up on the screen. Give our techs here a second. There we go. 48 in favor, 52 opposed. We then asked you how many could change your mind if you were so inclined, depending on what you heard over the last few minutes. 82% said yes, you could change your mind. 18% no. So public opinion was fluid, in play. So let's see what happened over the last 90 minutes. Did either team of these debaters swing opinion one way or another?
It's got to be towards the Taibbi Douglas Murray camp.
Up on
It's
the
got to
screen,
be. If
and
it's
then
not, I'll
we'll
lose all faith in
show
humanity.
The new vote. There we go.
So it went from 48 to 67. Went from 48 to
in favor of
67.
the motion, 33% opposed.
Okay, so what you have here is a demonstration that people are able to see through BS. And I hope that you guys did too. It was very clear who won the debate. Michelle Goldberg is a horrible debater. And frankly, just, if I'm just guessing, just the feeling that she gives me, she's a mess inside. And I have never seen Malcolm Gladwell more unlikable than he was today. Dismissive, throwing out straw men, and playing the race card over and over again. It was very clear to me that Douglas Murray was the star of this debate. Deservedly so. He gets an A+. I'll give Matt Taibbi a B. He did an adequate job, but clearly the star of this debate is Douglas Murray. If you had the chance to have him on your debate squad, oh my God, take it, because he is an all-star. And, Malcolm Gladwell gets a D, D-, and Michelle Goldberg, as usual, and this is the second time I've said this, gets an F or an F-. Guys, leave me your comments. Let me know what you guys think. Thumb up this video. It took a little while to do this. And subscribe if you haven't yet. And have a fantastic day. Peace.